About 54 million South Africans' personal information is allegedly in the possession of a group of hackers believed to be based in Brazil. The hackers are demanding about 225 million rand from credit bureau TransUnion SA. In 2021, another credit bureau, Experian, faced a similar security breach, with credit bureaus working with sensitive information at the risk of compromise. Why then is there no strengthened security at these entities? For more on this, we speak to Chief Development Officer at Performanta, a company specializing in cybersecurity, Kotze. Brendan, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Let us actually just start with exactly that. Why is it that a company such as TransUnion SA could actually be hacked the way that it has been now?
So, looking at the security landscape, especially in South Africa, what we're starting to see is, especially with, the recent, COVID-19 geopolitical issues, security has become increasingly a bigger target. So what we are seeing, especially in the South African context, is, because of where our economy is, we're starting to see dwindling security budgets within the organizations. And mainly the most important thing for us is understanding what data is being stored, and is it being stored responsibly by these organizations. Just looking at this breach, apparently the attackers are claiming that they managed to breach a user that was using password. So quite a concern in the industry.
It really is quite a concern. And so what do you think needs to then be done for something like this to not happen?
Well, I think the South African legislation is quickly catching up to where we should be in comparison to the rest of the globe. So I really think that the regulator needs to come out and make a strong statement, not necessarily targeting TransUnion. But we need to, as South African citizens, we need to ensure that these organizations that have our data are treating it responsibly. And I think on the second side, we as individuals need to understand that there's a shared responsibility. What data are we putting out there, providing to organizations? Where are they storing that data? And how do we get that data removed if we don't really want it out there? And that goes across not only organizational data like what we're experiencing with TransUnion and Experian, et cetera, but what are we sharing on LinkedIn? What are we sharing on Facebook? What are we sharing on TikTok and all these social media platforms? Attackers are using this data to attack the individuals and attack corporations.
The interesting thing is what you're mentioning now, Brendan, around what are we actually putting out on social media ourselves. But, with a situation like with TransUnion SA, this is quite a big company that has now been hacked. You've mentioned the issue of possible budgetary constraints. But for a South African, what can I personally do to ensure that my security is safe, and that I don't get hacked in a certain manner?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of things, and we cover these, every single IT security person will recommend the same things. So first of all, make sure that you have a good antivirus on your machine. Make sure that you're not reusing passwords. We see a lot of personal individuals that are using the same password for absolutely every single website, every single service they subscribe to. So if one falls, they all fall. There are solutions like two-factor authentication, very much like you would log onto your banking system, where they provide you a PIN code or an authorization app. Just to please make sure that those are enabled across absolutely every platform that supports that. And then obviously, the biggest attack vector that we're seeing is phishing links. It has been and will always remain to be the biggest attack vector. So just be, cognizant of how these attackers are trying to get to you. If it seems too good to be true, don't click the link. If you see an urgent notification from your bank, don't click the link. Go directly to the bank's website via your browser by typing it in rather than clicking links.
So, with a situation like with TransUnion, what do you think they could have done better, really, Brendan, to ensure that this kind of hacking does not happen, if anything at all?
Look, I think it's quite difficult at this stage. We know that they, obviously TransUnion is in a forensic investigation right now, so I'm sure that they'll close that hole off for whatever hole was there. But really it's about security strategy. Are you doing the right things? Are you validating that the security controls that you put in place are effective? So I think at an organizational level, it's making sure that you have the right strategy in place and that strategy is actually effective. There are multiple different solutions and providers out there that can assist organizations to reach that sense of maturity. Being secure isn't good enough. You need to be safe.
And so we know that these alleged hackers are from Brazil at this stage, and in most cases one would wonder, how is it possible that a company or the hackers that are far away from the initial place or the initial company that they're hacking are actually able to get into the documents or into the company itself?
Look, I mean, we've got to remember that in the information age, there is no such thing as a border. Everything's online, especially with the move to digitalization and a remote global workforce. So, the geolocation of an attacker is not necessarily relevant in the information age. But what we are starting to see is, especially with the Ukraine-Russia situation, is political agendas being aligned to a hacker motive and opportunity. Lapsus is another group that we've seen come out of Brazil attacking organizations like NVIDIA, a global US chipset maker. So really, I mean, the geopolitical or the borders don't apply in the information age. So your attacker could be anywhere from right next door to you, sitting on your wireless, to the other side of the world.
And that's the scary thing about cyberspace or the cyber world, really, because anything can happen to your personal information at any time, Brandon. But we now know that these hackers want a ransom. What do you think could possibly happen if that ransom is not paid out? And would you suggest that it actually does get paid out?
So TransUnion's already come out with a statement, which is the right thing to do. I personally don't believe that organizations should be paying ransoms. It just perpetuates the cycle and gives the attackers, that revenue opportunity, which is what they're after. They want to breach a network and monetize, either the attack or the data that they've in fact stolen. What I think that this specific group is trying to do now is quite a lot of organizations, from finance through to vehicle automotive providers and insurers. This group is specifically now going to try and target those organizations and get them to pay a fee to not leak their specific data. So yeah, it's really, they're going to try and monetize it through either ransomware, which is what we've typically seen historically with organizations encrypting the data, and then paying to get access back to that data. What we're seeing now is a bit of a shift. So stealing that data, and then holding those organizations and those third parties connected to that data to ransom.
And of course, this is a credit bureau, and there's a lot of information, including South Africans' information, that has now been these hackers now have access to. What kind of things do you think people could actually find with this situation?
So, the premise, and obviously TransUnion is going through the forensic investigation. They will be notifying any users of any information that has potentially been breached. The consensus at this point is it would be personal identifiable information, so names, surnames, ID address, or ID number, your personal address, your credit status score, perhaps who you bank with, what your salary is. So quite a lot of information an attacker could use to craft, a more specific or more personalized attack, which would invoke that fear of the user. If somebody's emailing you with, your bank loan has been declined, and they put your valid address, your valid ID and address number, that attack feels far more real because it's using real data to that user, and then encourage them to click an attack or click a link or provide additional credentials or approve an authentication app. So really the outcome of this breach from a user perspective is going to be wide and far-reaching.
Do you think, Brandon, that the cybercrime laws in South Africa, could they possibly be strong enough to somehow deal with cyber attacks?
Yeah, look, I think we've matured quite a lot as a country in terms of legislation and done that relatively quickly. But I don't think at this stage that, as an example, the information regulator has shown teeth in the industry. There is provision in that legislation for up to a 10 million rand or 10 years imprisonment fine. So my advice really would be to the organizations to take note of this and really just try and work with government, try and work with private industry, and collaborate. Because at the end of the day, the individual at the end of the chain is the person that really suffers.
And what's the first thing then, Brandon, finally, if there is a cyber attack on a person's personal information, what is the first thing that needs to be done?
I think the first thing to do is not to panic. I think a lot of this is emotionally invoked. So, you might get an alert saying that you have been breached when you haven't. So always be cautious and validate the information or the alert, first of all. You can then report that forward through to, there's multiple different organizations. But especially the first people you want to be notifying is your banks. Put that on hold, change your passwords, run a full antivirus scan on your machine. But yeah, I think the first thing to do is actually just not to panic. There are insurances around your information, around your data, around the money in your bank. The quicker you notify those individuals is the quicker you can contain that. And then obviously, from an individual level, it goes far beyond financial impact. If your machine were to be ransomed, there's a lot of photos, private information, critical documents that you have on your machine. Losing that has other implications as well outside of the financial remit. So always make sure that you have really good backup that preferably is stored off-site, not on your machine, on an external USB drive, etc., and just really prepare yourself for the event that it's not about if, it's about when.
And what kind of software should one be having to try and alleviate or to try curb the possibility of a cyber attack?
So I think that one of the most important things is a password manager, which, obviously if we're going to be changing passwords across multiple different sites, having them complex, having them long, keeping track of those passwords is incredibly difficult. So a password manager is something that's definitely needed. There's a two-factor authentication app. I mean, lots of providers are doing these free, obviously free of charge, whether that's SMS or an actual application that you open. Have one of those. And then obviously a very good antivirus, preferably something that's commercial from a trusted provider, I think are the best steps for a user to have. And obviously if you want to extend that into the privacy realm, remote working from home, hopefully now going back to coffee shops, is install a VPN on your machine so that, that private communication, nobody can intercept that if you're in a coffee shop and there's a hacker, enjoying a cup of coffee at the same time.
Chief Development Officer at Performanta, a company specializing in cybersecurity, Brendan Kotze. Thank you so much for your time this morning.